Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Orr, and I have the lovely job of being the Executive Director of the UK and Ireland Spill Association. And today we're starting a series that will run probably throughout this year on plastic pollution and marine debris. And the object of this webinar is really to be a bit of an introduction to it. And as you will see, we've been doing a fair bit of work on this topic during the last year or so, and therefore I'm really grateful for all the contributions which have been made by our plastic pollution working group, and they've really helped us with that. It's their knowledge that I'm privileged to share. So a little bit about us. We're the trade association for marine and inland response companies in the UK and Ireland and Republic of Ireland, and we represent contractors, manufacturers and consultants. We also have our related company, International Spill Accreditation Schemes, runs a comprehensive accreditation process for inland responders, and that company also delivers the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency scheme for the accreditation of marine spill response organisations. And within both the inland and the MCA scheme, there are shoreline modules, and so many of the responders that we have are accredited to work on shorelines. Now, last year and this all started because last year a number of our responders were being called out to deal with relatively small plastic spills. And how do you class small? Well, in a way, we classed it as being less than a ton, so less than 1,000 kilograms. But if any of you have been involved in spills, you will soon realise that 1,000 kilograms of plastic, particularly nurdles, spreads a hell of a long way. And so what we wanted to do was engage with the Environment Agency in the United Kingdom to discuss this with them and say, are you also receiving the same number of calls? So prompted by that call, they asked our association to develop a nationwide response plan specifically aimed at local authorities so that when plastic arrived on their beaches, removal could be safely and promptly arranged. And with that, our group formed in April last year. And some of what I'm going to present today is their findings. And however, having formed and having done trials and then done testing and then done some things for real, it soon became obvious that what we were doing was useful. It solved an existing problem, but of course the mission is much, much larger. So our plastic pollution working group grew into a multidisciplinary group of member companies, regulators, academia, and I'm sure it will grow, because I think there is a need for more information rather than less to be spread, to be circulated. And one of the objectives of the group is to share what we are able to share with as many people as possible, so that the industry worldwide is better able to respond to these incidents, and people are better informed of possibly what good looks like, what safe looks like, and they are prepared to do a good job. Because ultimately, the ocean serves us all, and protection of it is really, really important. So I'm just going to ask that guy to mute. Okay, so a definition: marine debris is defined as any persistent solid material that is manufactured or processed and directly or indirectly, intentionally or unintentionally, is disposed of or abandoned into the marine environment. And this is a definition that I've taken straight off of NOAA's website. Now, today, there's no place on Earth which is immune to this problem. And a majority of the litter and debris that covers our beaches comes from storm drains and sewers, as well as from shorelines and recreational activities, such as picnicking and beach going. Abandoned or discarded fishing gear is also a major problem, because this trash can entangle, injure, maim and drown marine wildlife and also damage property. So let's look at these sources a little bit more and discuss them. And this slide tries to illustrate, this is a surface for sewage slide. They're very active in the United Kingdom, and they've got some great literature to help guide members of the public, other NGOs, but also, professionals like ourselves. So land-based debris generally comes from human activities. So if you look at the picture of the toilet, it's stuff which is flushed down toilets, which contains plastics. It's coming out of our sewers in terms of things like wet wipes, cosmetic products which contain plastic. It's coming from waste which is just discarded after it's used without going into a proper refuse container. It ends up in our streams, ends up in our rivers, and it washes from our rivers into our estuaries and ends up out at sea. Then you have the ocean-based marine debris. This could be litter dumped from vessels. It could be fishing gear. It could be equipment which is lost from vessels in heavy weather, or indeed it could be debris which is blown off platforms in strong winds. And then, of course, most regrettably and it is disaster debris. So this is debris from abandoned buildings, debris from abandoned vessels, and you've seen in the recent incident in Tonga just how much debris arose from one tsunami wave or a succession of tsunami waves. But the debris is considerable, and all this ends up back into a very delicate ecosystem called the marine environment. So this is a large scale problem. So it's estimated at 23 million metric tons of plastic waste per year, but this excludes ocean and disaster debris. But National Geographic forecasts that 22 million growing to 58 million tons per year. But this, of course, includes commitments from government and industry, if only they would honour those. If we don't change, and if the pledges that have been made and governments have committed to are not honoured, then 99 million tonnes of uncontrolled plastic waste would end up in the environment by 2030. And to visualise this is a refuse truck tipping a load of waste into the ocean every minute, every day for a year. Or alternatively, a football stadium filled with plastic every day. But I guess the size of the football stadium and the size of the problem depends on whether you support Fleetwood United or Tottenham Hotspur. But the issue that whilst that's a joke, it's not meant to be completely flippant. But the issue is the rising tonnage of plastic in the seas is a real problem. And the growth of plastic production is outpacing the world's ability to keep up with collecting it, despite the efforts which are going on by a lot of NGOs, a lot of government organisations to try to solve the problem. And this is partly because production is forecast to more than double by 2050. And it's estimated that it will increase to 756 million tonnes of plastic by 2050, from 308 million tonnes produced in 2018. And this is based on data which was gathered by the American Chemistry Council in 2019. The problem is that the scale is so great that governments must intervene because producer responsibility, in other words, the manufacturers and the people who buy the products from them, has failed. Okay, so how can they do this? I mean, some steps have been made. For example, in the United Kingdom and now in most European countries, there was a plastic ban introduced. In UK, it was introduced in October 2015. At that time, major supermarkets supplied 564 million, that still sounds a lot, single-use carrier bags in 2019-20. And this compared with over, if if I can get that out of the way, it was a reduction of over 7.4 billion bags compared to those supplied in 2014. So since we introduced this scheme in the United Kingdom, the number of single-use carrier bags has gone down by more than 95% in England. A total of £180 million has also been raised from the sale of these bags for good causes from the revenue that's collected when you have to buy your single-use carrier bag at the supermarket checkout. And equally, in 2018, the UK banned the use of microbeads in cosmetics. And that actually was really good because they also prohibited the use of biodegradable microbeads. And these things were being used in facial scrubs or hand cleaners and things like that. So some good has been done in this country. And I know that in most particularly European and United States, they have had similar bans. The issue we need to get to is what is called extended producer responsibility. And this is a strategy to add all of the environmental costs to the product which is being made of plastic, which is then, and the costs are through its product life cycle. So the environmental costs associated with the product, the idea is to force the adoption of remanufacturing initiatives because it focuses on the end-of-use treatment of a consumer product and has the primary aim to increase the amount and degree of product recovery and to minimize the environmental impact of waste materials. So what they're trying to do is firstly, force through extended producer responsibility, force the manufacturers to use recycled product, force the manufacturers to use, if it is a virgin product, use a virgin product which can then be recycled, and heavily penalize the manufacture of a plastic product which is of single use and cannot be recycled. So it's really focused on trying to change manufacturer behavior. Now this is actually in place in some countries, but our government in UK wants to do this, but the legislation is drafted and it will be presented to Parliament during 2022. It was going to be presented in 2020, but then COVID got in the way, which has delayed it. Now, what we also need governments to do is to enable recycling and reuse. Now, in many countries, and I've worked in Germany, and there is a form of deposit return scheme which really encourages you to recycle your glass, recycle your plastic, and every time you take something back, you get a credit. And it might only be a small amount, but it accumulates such that it's worth doing. And these deposit return schemes now exist in Germany, Belgium, Croatia, Sweden. You can see them on the list. And in Norway, it's been so successful that they've managed to capture 96% of the single-use plastic bottles. That is considerable, and it then means that people are being incentivized to recycle it, not just throw it for waste disposal. But waste management strategies are urgently required. We are now, we've stopped generally exporting plastic waste, such as the type you see in the slide in these containers. But governments mustn't export waste because generally it's going to countries which are ill-equipped to deal with the waste problem that we're dumping on them. And it's not responsible government to do that. And government must use its purchasing power to force change of manufacturers, in local governments, and local governments must use that to force change within their communities. And waste management strategies are, really important that we recycle and reuse what we can. Now I'm going to come out of this sharing and I'm going to try and then share something else. So do excuse me a sec. So I want to show you a very brief video. Right. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry that that was a bit cheesy, but it was worth it really, because it's it. But the idea is that we can all do something which can help help us do things more sensibly and do things that are better for the environment. Okay, so moving on. So the problem is in this country, and I know in other countries are no better, that only 9% of plastic waste is currently recycled. And we need to increase this by medium and small projects, because large projects are too ambitious and they are hard to fund and get going. But if we start with small projects will become medium-sized projects, and one day medium-sized projects will become large-scale products. But we've got to make a start. Government needs to encourage innovation, and it is trying to do so through projects like Horizon 2020, which, even despite it being a European initiative, we're still part of. Innovate UK, we have a very active UK research and innovation community. We have angel investors who can do this. We have universities who are trying to do this. And these things are all important, because innovation is possibly our way out of this problem. And I'll show you a little video in a minute about something like this. But we need to get people engaged as we change, and we try to work towards towards sustainable plastic production. Manufacturers have a huge part to play in this, and manufacturers can make a difference. And actually, the British Plastics Federation have committed to recovering 100% of the plastic that their members produce by 2030. And I'll show you another cheesy, well, this is not a cheesy piece, but I'll try and show you a little I'll name or shame him, because he is somewhere on my screen. Where is it? Because he is committing in this to have, oh, I can't find it. That's a nuisance. Okay, don't worry. I'll just go back to sharing my screen. Because what we want is manufacturers to change, and manufacturers can change. And if we drive them towards changing, we will end up with more solutions. So what we've got to do is stop the use of single-use plastics. We've got to reduce plastic packaging. We've got to ensure production is only using plastic that can be recycled. And we need manufacturers to engage with consumers about what they will accept. And it is really important that consumers play a role and are taken along this journey, such that we end up with reducing the use of single-use plastic and that we recycle. But therein lies a problem. Where does the plastic go? Okay, now this should work straight from the video. Energy from waste plants. Hopefully you're able to see this. Are you able to see this video? Let me have a look. Please, somebody tell me if you can. Can you see it? Yeah, you can. Great. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, we can see it. I can see it.
Good.
I think you have to hit the, put your cursor on the arrow. It's not playing.
Is it not playing? Ah, right.
No.
Sorry, hang on, let me, okay, I pressed the button on the barrel. And let me try and share. Let me see if okay, can you see this screen with Babcock and Wilcox on it?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay,
yes.
fine, okay, right, let me play that.
Yes.
That works.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't. I think we probably all have our own views on energy from waste, but in general, it is solving a problem. But is it really a long-term solution? So, energy from waste plants, they're controversial. They are very controversial. There's a big attitude in the United Kingdom that they're not for being in my backyard, but they're definitely better than exporting. They're definitely better than landfill, but they're no better than local recycling. And it works well when the price for waste is low. And the issue with that is that the price for waste isn't low at the moment. So, and at the moment, recycled plastic prices have doubled to hit new records as supplies continue to be affected. So this is supplies of virgin material are affected. And so what it's doing is this should be encouraging local recycling initiatives, and it should push waste management companies to encourage ethical local collection, separation, and revenue generation for local people. However, many local authorities have tied themselves into contracts with waste management companies who run these waste to energy sites, and they have a minimum threshold of waste that they're going to supply them with, which means that there is the potential plastic which could have been recycled is now being sent to a waste from energy plant, as opposed to being recycled into a material that can re-enter the plastic manufacturing chain. And so there's lots of tension in these arguments, and we just need to discuss these and see what ways forward there are. The other thing we need local authorities and government to do more to engage further with universities. Universities always need outlets for research, but they need partners with whom they can discuss these issues. And within our community, we need to reach out to universities. Interdisciplinary working is absolutely essential. And I encourage anyone who's in a business here to talk with universities, college, and to also talk to non-governmental organizations and also to volunteers. Now I'm going to see if this link should work. I'm going to stop sharing and share this screen. Where is it? Okay.
Hi there, Mark. We don't have audio.
Oh, right. Okay. I wouldn't know how to do that then. Right. Let's have a look. Let's stop it and let's see. Let me see if I can get the audio to work. Okay, I can't get that, so I'll stop sharing that and I'll switch him off. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I can't, let me get back to sharing my screen. Okay. I'm sorry that didn't work. All right, okay. But the point that he was making is that this is Portsmouth University, which is just a traditional, relatively local community university. It's quite reasonably active, but they are actually reaching out and working with local communities, and they need input from everybody. The next source of change is really NGOs. The problem is too large, this problem is too large to leave to someone else to solve it. Non-governmental organizations have clout, but they need support. Local authorities can deliver coordination and they can deliver logistics to support volunteer efforts. And there are lots of good things which NGOs are doing. In the United Kingdom, we have an organization called Surfers Against Sewage. It's just one of the active NGOs in this area, but they've got 1,000-mile beach clean. That's their goal. And every day there's a little ticker going on the beach cleans which are being held. And what their goal is to clean 1,000 miles of beach. It's a really simple message. And what they're also doing through it is trying to encourage the people who participate to become plastic-free communities. Simple message, great brand, good marketing, but it's effective. And I love this little thing of the plastic coming out of the pipe attached to a seawall, but it represents some of the problems of what is going on. So these are good things which are going on, and they need partners. They need partners to support them in the work that they're doing. And we within our industries are able to do that. The problem is not going away. In fact, history tells us that the problem is arriving. And it's not a new problem. If we look at MV Rayner, this was a container ship which hit a rock off South Africa, and it was and these issues are never easy to deal with. This had a lot of containers on it. The access to the vessel was very difficult. It was in a stormy part of the world. It was hard to understand what was in the containers, but of course, the vessel, once it was agreed that it couldn't be taken off the rocks, that it was there, the access to the vessel was very difficult. How do you recover all the product in these containers safely without making the problem worse? And so they had terrible problems. Here you see guys trying to work on the vessel. Really, really difficult, dangerous. The risks had to be managed carefully to ensure that it could be done without risk to life. But how did they? It took a lot of work. But how could you limit the spread of the products in the containers and the container themselves and limit the impact? And it was extremely difficult and costly and timely and expensive to do. Then recently, and we have members involved in this and people on this call are from companies who are actively involved in this. This is a container feeder vessel which shuttled containers around. It had a maximum capacity of around, I think, 1,700 containers. And here it is with 1,486 containers on board, of which one, which is between the just behind the forward mast thing, is black and is burning. And On the 11th of May, the crew found one container which was contained drums of nitric acid was leaking. They sought permission from Qatar and then Hazira, India, both ports that this vessel had recently visited, to seek support in removing this container such that they could carry on their journey. They both refused entry, saying we don't have facilities to deal with it. The vessel arrived off Colombo on the 19th of May. It actually caught fire on the 20th of May. And despite attempts to extinguish the vessel, to douse it with dry powder and do all sorts of things, the vessel basically continued to burn, and it burnt itself out by the 30th of May, when salvors went on board to assess the condition of the vessel. And their goal was to tow it into deeper waters and presumably allow it to sink and then be lost into the waters. Unfortunately, as they started to tow, the stern, the back of the vessel broke, and its stern is now stuck where this picture was where it was when this picture was taken, and there's a hell of a problem, a huge environmental problem, and because all of the product has been lost. The containers, many of the containers have either sunken and broken up, or have ended up on the beach and just broken up. But on board were 3 containers carrying plastic pellets, and each of those containers weighed 26 tons. And the debris lost from the vessel has been immense. It's been highly polluting. It's been very disruptive and has impacted over 60 kilometers of coastline. And the effect of this loss will continue for many years. Now, I want to put into perspective that this was a loss of just 1,486 containers in one location. Very tragic. But each year, on average, 1,383 containers are lost per year at sea. Yet in the Pacific last year, container losses were over 3,000 containers. Some were containing hazardous cargo, some were containing, relatively non-hazardous cargo. The marine industry needs to wake up to the fact that it has a, if you like, a carrier responsibility. And as vessels get larger, the stability of these vessels in heavy weather becomes more critical. The routing of them is absolutely vital. Ship handling needs to be, of these very large container vessels, needs to be better understood. And we need to find a way of handling and storing these containers such that perhaps the location of them on the vessels is risk assessed. Weather is becoming less predictable, and we're getting greater unpredictability in weather, which affects the ability to route vessels to avoid it. Vessels are getting larger, therefore the forces being exposed on these container stacks are greater, and in fact the losses will increase. And I know at the moment within IMO there's discussion and there's lobbying from many sides about whether it should be agreed that containers containing hazardous substances, which would include plastics, should be stored below decks. In other words, they're less exposed to stacks of containers being knocked off by weather. But I bet you bottom dollar, I'd certainly buy you a pint of beer, that actually we don't end up with this being agreed at this stage. The problem is that people have this belief that containers just sink. Well, they don't. Out of the containers which were lost in the Pacific last year, approximately 30% floated around for more than a month. They exposed a danger to shipping. They spread the effect of the loss of the containers and the damage caused to the marine environment. It increased the spread of the tragedy for the environment, but is action sufficient? Hazardous goods really need, logically, to be stored below deck. there needs to be a reduction in stack height. There needs to be better engineering of container restraining systems, and there needs to be smarter loading. The issues that you can see now, and this is one APUS which lost, I think, nearly over 1,000 containers during a storm in the Pacific last year. The problem is that pressure on our logistic chain is so tight that we're struggling to reignite our economies, because it's taking so long to get vessels in and out of ports, and there's such pressure on ports that actually there's very little time to do the safety checks on the containers properly, to check the loading of them properly. It's just get them in and get them out and continue the supply, the marine supply chain. And the problem also for the marine environment is that these vessels are getting larger, they're getting more automated. Marine shipping is going to increase by at least 20% over the next 30 years. There's lots and lots of issues within this. So it's not a simple answer. The question of when are these containers going to arrive on our shores full of plastic, it's a question of not if, but probably when. And the question is, are we prepared for it? What is the plan? And is it exercised? Now, actually, we're fortunate in the United Kingdom in that we have a lot of competence, and we have a reasonable amount of capability. And in last September, off Portland in Dorset, and that's Portland Bill in the background, there was a multi-agency, a multi-company exercise to test the effectiveness and to exercise command, control, and communication in the sort of instance that we're talking about. And it is really important that these things are exercised. We've seen in various instances which have occurred over the last couple of years that plans are great, but plans must be exercised. They must be tested. People, resources, and plans must be put under pressure to see that they work under stress. So out of some of all of this, we formed what we call a plastic pollution working group. And its scope has gone from being just talking about how do we provide a response plan for local authorities to this sort of work plan. And I'm sharing it because we've had several meetings recently. And so what we're doing is we're trying to look at all these things. So we're trying to understand the problem, the sources, the pathways, the impacts of plastic pollution from rivers to the oceans. We're trying to identify the most effective equipment for the recovery of macro and microplastics from shorelines and near-shore environments. We're trying to establish agreed methods for the assessment of ecological impacts of plastic recovery operations. We're trying to establish agreed methods for qualitative and quantitative assessment of macro and microplastics in sediments and waters, and effective sampling and monitoring techniques. We're trying to assess environmental and health risks associated with macro and microplastics to assist in the cleanup endpoint determination. We're trying to develop effective approaches for the surveillance and modeling of macro and microplastics to aid in response efforts and the prediction of plastic movement and source identification. And we're also developing approaches to the sustainability assessment with respect to plastic recovery endpoints and final destination of recovered plastic and debris. There is issues with this. You get a spray of nurdles on the beach, but do you do more harm in recovering them than actually and what level are you recovering them to? In some countries, there are no baseline assessments of what the pollution is on a beach. So you have no target by which to achieve your cleanup. And we need to make sure that there are baseline assessments that we can work to so that when we deploy, we know what target we're trying to achieve in our cleanup. We also need to identify effective tools and equipment for controlling plastic at source, on site, in drains and in rivers. And interesting, the British Plastics Federation have produced a publicly accessible standard to try to encourage their members who are manufacturers or store plastics or store nurdles to actually have containment systems on site which are audited and checked. And also we're working with our accreditation company to ensure that the module for shoreline plastic pollution and marine debris recovery is formally released. And those are the goals that we're going to be working through this year. And the object of this webinar is to introduce the work that we're doing, but also to say that we're going to share what we're doing with you through webinars, demonstration days, technical publication and liaison with other appropriate organizations. And so we're trying to be open about what we do to encourage greater awareness across the spill community. And I encourage other organizations to share their knowledge with us, because this is not just a UK problem, this is a global problem. And we are very fortunate that within the UK, we have a lot of expertise, and within our membership, we have a lot of members who have a lot of knowledge and have a lot of practical experience about doing it. And what we're keen to do through the Plastic Pollution Working Group is to share what we're doing. Note that we have the Environment Agency involved, we have the University of Southampton involved. And I'm sure when I go to our next webinar, there'll be more companies involved, because we are talking to modelling companies about what can be done. Because in every spill incident I've gone to, there's always been the question of who's going to pay. And the more we can do to find out who the polluter was, the easier it is to basically get it cleaned up quickly, because you know you have the resource, cut the expense of cleaning it up covered by the insurance policy of the polluter. So finding who the polluter is great, but actually the modelling software isn't where we want it to be, but there are lots of organisations working on that. So I'm really trying to explain what we're going to do. And the next webinar is going to come from within members of the Plastic Pollution Working Group, who are going to share some of their experience and knowledge with you. And I'm hoping that as we work on each of our work plan, and there's 10 items with it, we'll update you with webinars on where we're at and what we're doing and what we're encouraging. Now, I've got an apology to make, because I was going to be followed, to give my voice a rest, by a case study, but actually both of the guys who are going to give case studies are involved in a spill in Liverpool Bay, because a pipeline between two oil platforms has leaked, and they're on that. So you've had to put up with me for 40 odd minutes. So I'm going to open the floor now, and if anybody wants to say anything or chip in or have any comments to make, I would be delighted to hear them, because I know that I actually didn't crack it with the videos, but if anyone has anything to say, please chip in. The floor is yours.
Hi, Mark. It's Rob Holland here from OSRL.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, how are you?
I'm all right. Sorry about my videos. I should have done a run through with you first, because you're far better at this than I am.
No problem. I do a lot of work with the university and academic world around oil spills, and I'm just interested in who you're talking to in that academic world with regards to this. I saw University of Southampton on there,
yeah.
And I think through my OSRL colleagues, I can provide some more contacts for you. But yeah, just interested on University of Southampton's role.
They're basically. We're talking initially to the Marine Science Group, which is a multidisciplinary group within the university. The people who you will know, a chap called Ian Williams, a chap called Malcolm Hudson, and a chap called James Blake. The reason we've started there is because they have test tanks and they have testing facilities and they have PhD students and master students. And also I'm familiar with the group from work that I've done with another company.
Sure.
And also they're quite practical scientists in that they like making things. And so one of the things that they like playing, and they need people to help them play with their toys, which they invent in the laboratories, and sort of take it from theory into practice and see what works. So we're starting with that, but also we're reaching out within the university to a number of other departments and indeed to the National Oceanography Centre, because some of our work plan involves talking to them.
Right.
And we're also talking on some of the marine science aspects to the plastics group within CFAS, because they're quite keen. We're at an early stage of discussing them joining the group.
Cool. Okay. Thank you very much.
I know that there is some good knowledge in Plymouth and there's some good knowledge in Cardiff. And but at the end of the day, we don't want to make the group so big that we don't get any work done. And so, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Rob.
I'll feed in via my colleagues and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anybody got any other points they want to make or any discussions or share any experience?
There's one in the chat, Mark.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Right. Hazel. Sorry. Yes. Hazel. Right. Hazel says, I can't unmute my mic for some reason, but thank you for a really great introduction. Oh, that's okay. I didn't think it was that good myself, but anyway. So just picking up on the government input, we try to quantify capabilities when it comes to hazardous waste. As I know that obviously landfill is the least desirable option, but have you had luck with waste locations and how much they're able to cope with in relation to plastic waste? There's a whole piece of work which needs to be done on this, because when we look at plastic, if we can get it back into it, if we can recycle it and get it back into the supply chain, will the manufacturers accept it? And this is, I think, a real problem. You can make benches, you can make garden benches, you can make planters and things like that, but that is not going to be sufficient to solve the problem. And we need people to participate in this discussion. And if anybody who's on this wants to participate with the group on this, because we need to find streams and we need to be able to talk with the recyclers so that they will accept what we want, what we want to give them, because they've got to be able to turn it into something useful. You know, when we recycle cardboard boxes, generally they can be made into another cardboard box. So we just need to find out what they want and how they will accept it. And if anyone's got any bright ideas, please chip them in now, because I think it would educate the group.
Mark, just a point I want to make is obviously some of the absorbents that we use from one particular UK manufacturer, they use a big quantity of recycled polypropylene, and polypropylene is also a form of plastic. So it may be something for the group to pass on as well, to speak to their local absorbent manufacturer or people that they use. Have they used, and at what percentage do they use with recycled plastic in each heat of absorbent?
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing which there was recently a thing called the Global Plastics Initiative, which was a conference. It was a bit too high level. It was more about using ocean plastics recovered from the ocean to turn them into cases which went round Dell laptops. And it was a great initiative. It was a good idea. And I support Dell in what they're doing. It won't save the world's problems, but it was a good example of what can be done if you have a large corporation behind you who's prepared to invest in trying to make their production process greener. And it was good. One thing which really impressed me was a presentation from a company called Waste Free Oceans. And this is a Spanish, I guess he's an entrepreneur because he thinks like an entrepreneur. And what he's doing is he's encouraging fishing communities, and he has now projects in 37 different countries. The fishermen go out with plastic drums and they recover what they can when they're out in the ocean, and they pan their plastic drum in, they pick up an empty one, and they go out and they keep doing it. And what do they get for it? They get a small amount of money for it. It's an incentive to do it because while they're looking at their fishing net, they can pick up plastic and stuff it in a drum. But also it makes them feel good, and they become, if you like, plastic collection champions. And the local authorities work with them such that they keep their ports clean. So when they're not out fishing, they're going around the port with their plastic drums, collecting plastic, stuffing it in their plastic drums, and they're helping keep the port green. That is a lovely local initiative, and it's not going to change the world, but actually it's going to raise consciousness and it's going to change behavior, because people in, for example, the port of Barcelona, or people who live in Barcelona, know that these port guys do this work, the fishermen do this work, and actually it discourages them from just throwing it into the ditch or throwing plastic down the drain, because they know that somebody that they may recognize is actually going to have to go around and pick up their waste. So it's a start. It's all these things help, but what they're doing also is they're turning their recovered plastic and recovered fishing gear into mooring ropes, rope fenders, cheap uses of plastic, where at least it's being remanufactured and reused into something. So there's an end product. And I know that Paul Harold, hello Paul, he works for one of the government agencies. In Wales, there's an ongoing initiative by the Welsh government to try to recover fishing gear and reprocess it. And I think that's great. But we need lots of initiatives like that. And we need to do everything we can. Anybody got any other thoughts?
Yes, I would just like to mention one thing.
Yes, please.
And that is the fact that a plastic is a solidified fuel. And in order to make it inflammable, you have to start putting fire retardants into it. And these can be from anything from 10% up to even 50%. So whenever you think about using the plastics as a source of energy, you have to be faced with the fact that you've got these fire retardants in there. And there's always been a lot of controversy over medical waste in particular, because that tends to be PVC. And when you burn these types of plastics, especially if they've got halogenated fire retardants, you get a lot of soot formed. Yeah. And then you get very nasty products formed on the soot. In fact, so it becomes a serious environmental issue in itself. So it's just one thing to bear in mind, is that you're not dealing with a clean product.
No, and I think that's actually one of the issues about the recycling of it, because there are only certain types of plastic you can recycle. And I know that the non-recyclables are certainly targeted for these energy from waste plants, which use air scrubbers to actually extract those, if you like, more noxious substances so that they don't pollute the air around those energy from waste plants. It's a big problem, isn't it? It's a big problem. But if you have anything you can share, do share it, because it's a big problem.
Actually, I just wanted to mention that when you're talking about universities, because I became aware of this at a conference at the University of Northern Lancashire, in fact, in Preston. Yeah. And they've got experts on this subject up there. So they might be worth talking to, in fact.
So that was University of East Lancashire.
Yeah, it's in Northern Lancashire, I think it is.
Northern
Lancashire. In Preston.
Okay. And which department?
It would have been an engineering department, a combustion department. In fact, I could probably find the names of the people there.
If you would, and just share it to info@ukeirespill.org, I'd be really grateful.
Okay, just another little bit of interest about the plastics industry in general, because back in probably the 1990s, Exxon started to work on catalysts for forming polyethylene, and they had 100 patents on this. And Mobil was working on the same thing, and they had 50 patents. They went to a patent war, and eventually Exxon bought Mobil for $54 billion to get the 50 patents.
All right. Well,
Gives you an idea of
yeah.
the size of the industry.
It is. I mean, yes, and I know that the industry is trying to change, and oil companies are going to become energy companies, and good things will arrive, but we're going to go through a messy period, and we've got to manage this messy period, and it's a hell of a problem. And I think we're trying to do our little bit, and we're trying to share what we're doing with as many people as wish to be along that journey. So if anybody has any other points they want to make, please shout now.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah,
Mark, it's Nigel.
Nigel, how are you?
Collingwood. Can you hear me? Okay?
Yeah, you're okay.
Very well. Thinking that the appalling fact that we've been exporting our plastics to China, and a couple of years ago the Chinese stopped it, and since then it's been going to all sorts of other countries. I just can't believe that we've been getting away with this for so long, and you can imagine that they're dumping it on fields, and eventually this will go into rivers because they can't get rid of it, and it's all under the pretense of recycling.
Yeah.
And unbelievable mess everywhere, and this is going to get to the rivers in many cases. Apparently there are 10 rivers in the world that do the most pollution. 8 of them are in Asia, and those are the places we've got to concentrate most on to get the majority of the plastic from going into the sea.
I completely agree. And Ocean Cleanup have identified the 10 rivers. They published their research documentation publicly on it, and they're trying to raise funds particularly from large corporations, to provide vessels which will help clean up. And I think that's great. There are also initiatives. Lemoore are involved in a company called River Recycle, where they are trying to run recycling programs with communities such that they recover the plastic. The plastic generates an income which enables them to invest more in recycling, and they're great. And we need more and more of that. I would love to. I've been trying to persuade the MCA to allow us to put rivers across, to boom rivers in certain agreed locations, our major rivers, to boom the rivers on spring tides, so we catch all the plastic, which is, because we've got spring tides with very high tides and very low tides, we can collect the plastic which is being washed out the rivers on the 4 days around those after those high spring tides, so that you catch the plastic before it enters the sea. Unfortunately, I don't think our pleas have not been heard. So if anyone from the MCA is here, wouldn't it be wonderful to do a trial, and let's see what we can do with this. So yeah. So I mean, these things. I think if we all start talking about it in UK, we can get something to happen.
Yeah. Mark, one initiative on fishermen who are meant to be about the 10% polluters. We had for many years a recycling scheme, so they don't dump their ropes and nets over the side, and they can get rid of them for free.
Yeah, a chap called Theo Engering, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, Theo. He's noted that in the Netherlands we had an incident, the MSC Zoe, and actually I think Ambipar were off helping with that. One of the problems with parcels of plastic, which were polyethylene, were released from a box container and reached the shore. The reason the Zoe had an incident was the shortcut it made to go close to the shore in combination with high waves. These things are happening more frequently, and vessels are deviating from courses for various reasons and then getting into difficulties. And I know on the Zoe, yes, it caused a lot of disruption around the islands, on the Terschelling Islands off the north coast of Holland, which are pristine environments. And I know it was a lot of effort was put in to try to solve the problem. If anybody's got any more questions, chuck them in. Okay, well, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for attending this webinar. It is being recorded. The recording will be edited. I'll try and edit some of the awkward bits that I caused out of it, but it will be up on our website in the next couple of days. Thank you for attending. Keep in touch with us, what we're doing. You can see information on our website. We will be holding more and more webinars during this year. It's a great way of getting a community of people together and talking about common issues. But thank you very much for attending today, and have a good day and stay safe. Best wishes and goodbye.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.